tell me a little bit about your experience in teaching game theory and how does that actually relate to poker?
Well, game theory is the science of strategic interaction. Poker
Mhm.
has always been central to the study of game theory. I don't know if the study of game theory improves your poker in any way, although um, I think that the development of modern poker theory would not have happened if not for the science of game theory. It can't hurt, but it's it's not strictly necessary for the poker player. However, like studying the science of strategic interaction, that seems to be kind of a good background for poker. And what I think is that when I read a good book about poker theory, my my background in game theory allows me to see uh, why the solution is the solution somewhat more quickly than if I hadn't studied game theory. When I observe a best response to best response solution to a particular problem, I'm able to see why the solution is the solution relatively quickly because I've seen other solutions of the type. When I read a book like, I don't know, a good no limit book, say Acevedo's Modern Poker Theory, or more recently when I was studying Heads Up PLO and I read Corey Mikesell's book on Heads Up PLO, I think the processing of a book like that is easier because I've seen the principles of game theory applied in other settings. And I enjoy it, right? Like I enjoy working through Corey's book and seeing the solution to a particular problem and thinking about why that solution is the solution.
I do think like knowing a bit of game theory is useful. I don't find like going through the mathematics like particularly useful. I find it really challenging to do that. I failed game theory twice is the funny thing, but I could see how because of game theory, poker game theory evolved. That makes a lot of sense.
You're the computer science guy, so you might be able to explain this stuff a little better than I can. But
I
um, the way I would explain it is that the science of game theory offered a way forward for solving games that turned out to be uh, not especially useful or not the best way to go. And so the way that we solve games at the frontier now
yeah.
is uh, related to the science of game theory, but it's not exactly the science of game theory. If you watch a movie like AlphaGo about DeepMind's effort to beat Go, essentially they tell the story of how early on for chess engines and for Go engines, they used game trees and they sought solutions, game theoretic solutions to the problem, and that turned out to be not the best way to go relative to a computational solution where you lay out the objective function and then let the computer play against itself millions of times and converge upon a best response to best response solution.
You may have to translate that a little bit, but my interpretation is it sounds like to me you don't go purely from the theoretical route. It's better to actually go the experiential route, even for the computer, and just let it like iterate it and figure it out basically by like kind of stumbling in the dark would be the equivalent of like what a person might do for poker. Is that what you're trying to say?
Correct. That's exactly right. And it's still in that process, um, applying some game theoretic principles.
Okay.
So, for instance, experientially, it is eliminating dominated nodes of the game tree, right?
Okay. Okay.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that is sort of a game theoretic principle. You could also just say
Yeah.
it's a logical principle, but
It
It,
is. By the way, this isn't like I don't know like a ton about this, but I know what that means. And for the viewers that don't know what the hell that we're talking about, this would be like this would be like an example in poker would be, you decided to raise 10-8 offsuit from early position, and you've got enough sample that you realize, oh shit, this is a bad idea. Probably it's not a good idea to raise 10-8, 10-9 offsuit from early position, and you just like take away that whole like strategy of like playing that. That would be like an extreme example of what you're talking about. But then I presume the computer does that more and more and more so, and does so at an insane level. Is that correct?
yes,
I
yes.
wasn't even 100% sure when I was explaining it. Um, by
And
the
then,
way,
and then like when you look at how they what the overall solution to the problem comes up with, like just let's say you observe that in a certain situation their bet sizing on the end is always pot in PLO, or it's always all in and no limit, even if
yeah,
all in is like a multiple of the pot.
yeah,
That is another situation of they've eliminated dominated branches of the tree,
yes,
right? It's
yeah,
just in that case, the dominated branch of the tree is something less than all in, right?
oh, yeah, yeah.
Because the all in is forcing better and better hands into indifference relative to the dominated nodes of the tree, and they're eliminating the dominated nodes. It's game theoretic principles, but it hasn't been come upon by the science of game theory. It's been come upon computationally. To use an example from poker, okay, various overbets were uh, not especially common in the pre-solver era, right? You can read
Mhm.
through mathematics of poker and see why they make sense analytically, and perhaps if we had worked through things um, using the science of game theory, we would have gotten to the same place. Um, but we maybe got there earlier computationally. Another example is from the movie AlphaGo. The reason that they beat the human champion unexpectedly early is because they were often surprising the human champion with moves that they had never encountered before, right? And um, theoretically, maybe they could have come to those through just an extensive analysis of the game tree, right? But they probably got to them more quickly using the computational approach that they actually did,
From playing other players, you mean?
from having the computer play against itself tens of millions of times, subject to minimal,
I see.
right?
You're talking.
Like the way that we work through poker is um, you can have the computer play against itself and converge best response to best response, subject to some tight constraints like bet sizing constraints and things like that, or you can have it play against itself subject to minimal constraints. And minimal constraints takes a long time, but maybe you're getting better solutions.
And I have an example myself of that may be useful for the audience to understand this a bit. I took a bit of a relative sort of strategy of partitioning off the trees for my limited Scrabble experience when I had to play a Scrabble match against you. Do you remember we had a high stakes Scrabble match in
Yeah, I remember
Australia?
that in Australia.
Yeah. So um, I was paired to play a Scrabble match with you with through Tony G somehow, and Tony G has some catchwords such as what is it, on your bike, and like some really simple words that were worth way more points than the typical words of Scrabble. They were worth like 50 points, and there was like one four-letter word like shot, or I forget what other goofy shit does he say, but I was sitting there thinking, there's no way I'm gonna beat this dude, this Harvard grad guy in a Scrabble. There's no way I'm gonna actually be better than this guy. So my whole strategy was around like thinking of combinations of getting these 50 word points that were like short. There's like one I think bike was one of the words. Bike was like 50 points all of a sudden in Scrabble. And so I was thinking, okay, uh how do I make it just bike, just put out bike or whatever and look for those kinds of combos of words. That was my strategy to keep it really simple. I cut off all the other parts of looking for other kinds of words and looking for all these like convoluted words in general, these weird mix-ups. I believe that applies, right? Like that was my relative I ignored all the other trees because they just weren't time efficient. And yes, a real strategy would have included those. But I just, with my limited Scrabble experience, this was like a relative way for me to play in the most optimal way that I could against you. Does
Yeah,
that fit?
like a hack.